Hi there, it's Tom and Jerry here. Now you're watching this because you're a business trainer of some kind. You're either working inside a business or you're working externally as a consultant, trainer or coach. And when you're training, you cannot not influence. You're influencing all the time. But to what extent are you in control of the impact you make when you train? That's the nature of what we're going to talk about today, Tom.
Yeah, so this is a 5-minute video that will just give you a few insights into one of the things that we cover in the Financial Times Guide to Business Training.
Yeah, we want to make it very conversational. Please feel free to get back to us with questions or things you don't understand, or if you've got different points of view, we'd be interested in hearing from you. So just by way of introduction, I've been a teacher, salesman and manager, and two key things in relation to what we're talking about here is I was National Training Manager for L'Oreal and Pepsi. Now I've been doing this sort of thing for about 14 years or so, and we basically do four things every time. We do group training on all areas of influencing, one-to-one coaching, we do keynote speaking and write business books.
Exactly. And by way of introduction, my name's Tom Bird, and I have a career of two halves. First half was in a variety of business development, management and leadership positions for high-tech companies both in the UK, Europe and in the US, and then for the last 12 to 13 years focusing exactly as Jeremy says on coaching, training, authoring and speaking.
And for the last few years since we got together, we've been fascinated with this whole idea of influencing. And in fact, we've now trademarked a model called the CQ model of influencing. We trademarked that last year. And so what we wanted to do today was to give you an overview of the model, give you a sense of the background to it, and the sorts of things that you can control and think about in relation to when you're training people in business.
Yeah, and I guess where the model came from was from the research we did initially to support the first book, Brilliant Selling, but then when we broadened that out and we looked at a variety of the world's best trainers, I guess, as part of the research for this book, and we found that those self-same concepts that applied in business development and in influence in that context absolutely apply when you're delivering great training.
Yeah, so you want to know what the basic model is. The model's very, very simple. So we're going to show you an animation of the model right now. And the model, so there's three elements, as you can see: confidence, credibility, and connection. Here's what we're saying. In business training, when you're trying to influence people, these three things have to be in place. You have to be personally confident, because if you're not confident, that's going to be picked up on by your participants, and they may well decide that they don't want to listen to you if you're coming across as someone who's not particularly confident. You also need to be highly credible. That's, of course, typically down to your knowledge. You need to be a subject matter expert, but it's also down to your experience or your reputation, how you position yourself, and the sorts of things you do, on the day or on the program. And then the third element is connection. So you need to be able to build a harmonious connection or rapport with people. If you can't do that, you'll find it difficult to influence them on a training program. In other words, you need to make sure that they like you.
And I guess the real key point here is we called it C-Cubed for a reason, didn't we? It was that when we found people who trained that had any combination of one or two of those elements, they could be good. But it was actually only if they had all three, and more importantly, knew how to balance those aspects of credibility and connection. That was when they really made a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you've already bought our book, The Financial Times Guide to Business Training, then that's great. If you're still wanting or thinking about buying it, then it's available on in all good bookshops and Amazon, the book depository specifically. It's on part 4, chapter 14. That's when we look at it in more detail. Chapter 14, part 4. So I'm going to find that here now. And we've called it the foundations of influencing in this particular one. So what we're proposing to do is go through it in a little bit more detail to give you an insight so that you can use some of these ideas in the training you deliver. So confidence first, Tom, and we both know this. It's the same with, when we're doing keynote speaking stuff. You've got to be confident. And we've developed this idea that in order to be really confident, there are two elements, aren't there? That you can either develop your surface confidence or your deep confidence. Now, if you think about surface confidence comes from things like being able to breathe properly through the diaphragm, doesn't it? If you're not breathing, we're constantly seeing people who when they are delivering stuff, they're not breathing properly, and that impacts on their ability to be able to connect with themselves.
And that's especially true, isn't it, when they're delivering training on content that might be challenging
Exactly.
in their view. So they have a degree of nervousness or something of that nature that comes to the surface and impacts their breathing.
Or they might be, delivering to an audience they're not used to, or a more
Absolutely.
senior audience or something like that. So you've got to be personally confident. You can do that through good breathing. You can also do it through simple things like, just thinking back to a time when you were really confident and remembering what it was like to be really confident, and then using that as a way of getting confident and into a resourceful state, in the present. And the final things we often talk about in relation to surface confidence is just make sure you've got a great goal. Visualize a goal. Yeah. Make sure that when you're before the training starts, you know what you want to try and achieve, and you know how you're going to do it, and visualize it. So we teach people how to do that on our Train the Trainer programs. So there's surface confidence, Tom, isn't there? But there's also deep confidence. Where does that come from?
Well, deep confidence comes from your ability and your focus on practicing some of those things that maybe you're not totally confident about to start
Yes.
with. Because it's when you're practicing at the edge of discomfort, when you know that what you're doing makes you feel just that little bit less comfortable than normal, that's the point where you're developing the real skill. So you've got to challenge yourself if you want to develop deep confidence, because deep confidence is often at an unconscious level, whereas surface confidence is around tactics that you can deploy.
Exactly.
Deep confidence is something you just feel. And you do that, you get that feeling by practicing at the edge of discomfort.
It is a feeling, but it's also now, the great thing is it's been scientifically proved, hasn't it?
Absolutely.
So tell us all about Myelin, because you love this Myelin stuff, don't you?
Love it, love it. So there's a great book called The Talent Code by Daniel Coyle, and in it what he does is he researches pockets of outstanding achievement in sport, in music, in a variety of different areas. And what he finds when he talks to neurologists about this is that actually, rather than it being down to the neurons, which is where it used to be felt that the skill was developed and resided,
Yep.
so it gave rise to this idea of an innate God-given talent.
Yep, exactly.
He finds that by practicing at the edge of discomfort, you're actually developing the insulation that surrounds the connectors between the neurons. And the more practice that you do...
that's called?
That's called myelin.
Yeah.
And the more practice that you do at that level, the quicker you are building sheath after sheath of myelin insulation, if you will. And it's that insulation that, if you like, makes the difference between a dial-up connection for the internet and broadband. So you're increasing the speed of transmission. So you're getting the skill in the muscle.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, as trainers, what does that mean? It means that if you really want to become better, and if you're watching this video, there must be some assumption that you want that to happen. You've often got to deliver stuff where you are on the edge of discomfort, to more senior audiences, keynote speaking to people, to larger audiences where you've got 500, 600, 700 people, talking about a subject which just gets you out of your own comfort zone as well. Those are all things that if you do that on a regular basis will make you feel much more confident.
Absolutely.
In a deep way.
Absolutely.
So we've got confidence, and we've got a lot more in the book about this, but there's also credibility.
Yeah, so the whole confidence thing, we talk about giving you tactics, I think it's around page 155 in the book, but let's move on to credibility, which comes from the Latin credo, which means I believe.
Yep.
So it is about the extent to which you create a sense in the participant population that you are believable. So there's a number of ways that you can do that, aren't there? I mean, you can look at, first of all, appearance. So sometimes we'll train a group of lawyers, and sometimes we'll train a group of people in a large retail environment. So again, our appearance there has to be matched to the needs of the audience. What are some other ways that you can build credibility?
Well, this is on, if you've got the book, this is on page 158 and through the next sort of 4 or 5 pages. First of all, you've got to have knowledge, of course. Knowledge is critical. So you've got to be the subject matter expert, but you also need knowledge of the audience. So you've got to lobby in advance. You've got knowledge of the market, the competition, knowledge of your own department, your market, etc., etc.
And more than that, you've not got to just have that knowledge really, really early on in the business training itself.
Deploy it.
You've got to deploy it. You've got to prove, you've got to give your credentials. And so few trainers in our experience actually take the time to give the credentials. They don't like talking about themselves because it feels like showing off.
Yes.
But there will be people in that audience that need to hear your credentials before they'll listen to your content.
And it's this idea of pacing before leading. You've got to pace people in their own world before you want to lead them to a place where, in the case that we're talking about here, you're trying to get them to change, do things differently, improve the way they deliver stuff.
And there is this understanding that actually there are a group of people or certain individuals who sought for credibility.
Correct.
So that's what they're filtering for. And then you've got a group of people who sought for connection. So they're fundamentally different, aren't they?
Yeah, so to give you an example there, we work with lots of professional service firms, lawyers, accountants, architects, surveyors, bankers, these types of individuals. They will almost always, in our experience, be sorting for credibility. Can I be bothered to listen to the person who's in front of them?
And for that group of people, demonstrating your credentials is important, as well as the way you use your tone of voice to demonstrate credibility rather than connection.
So what we mean by this is that if you speak like this, slowly, with the use of pauses, fairly monotone, and go down at the end of the sentence or phrase, you will come across
really credible.
Exactly. And that's critical to an audience who are looking for credibility. Whereas we often do work with retail organisations,
customer service,
and then we're going to speak in a very different way.
Absolutely. And I think a real key to making your training stick is to be able to know how to balance both of those things.
Exactly.
So that credible voice tone is really important when you open the training, because credibles need to hear and know that you're credible so that they'll listen to what you've got to say, whereas connectors will wait.
Exactly, good. So when you're telling a story, for example, use the connection voice tone. So that's much quicker, very few pauses, use the musicality of the voice and go up at the end of the sentence or phrase, and that aligns itself to storytelling, for example.
But when you're delivering a key message that you want somebody to believe, really important to use the credible voice tone.
And if you're going to do that, you might as well utilise the power of 3. So the power of 3 is a magical number in maths. And we often teach the importance of the power of 3. So an example of that is in the strap lines and marketing and selling of large organisations. So, McDonald's.
I'm loving it.
I'm loving it. Nike.
Just do it.
Exactly. So all these various different things. L'Oreal, we're worth it. You're worth it. All these various different things utilise the power of 3. So in your training, if you can just focus on 3 key elements,
Absolutely.
You're more likely to have very, very strong credibility, or 3 core messages, or repeat something 3 times to get your message across.
Yeah. And just, play with it on your hands. Use some visual anchoring in order to mark off the 3 key points that you want to make. So we've talked a lot about credibility, a lot of ways that you can demonstrate that. And again, the final part of the equation, the C-cube equation, is connection. Now I know on credibility, I think it's at page 158, we start talking about some of the things that
Connections at 163.
Yeah.
So connections about, you've got to be able to connect with the audience. You know what this is like. It's a bit like in any situation, you are performing to a certain degree, and they've got to like you. So you've got to do things to make sure that your participants like you. The reason that's so important is because they will connect your material with whether they like you or not. So you've got to make sure that you find ways to build this connection. So how do we do that?
Well, there's a number of ways, aren't there?
Yep.
We've already talked about voice tone, and we've illustrated the difference in voice tone. So a more modulated tone, something with more musicality in it, will be more appealing to a connector. But there are also some body language cues, aren't there? So body language-wise, if you want to use palms up, that's more approachable. It's more about a connector. Whereas when you're trying to communicate credibility, you do so with palms down.
Correct. Simple other things, lobby in advance. Make sure you know the people on your training programs. I'm always surprised that people don't do that. And sort of connected with that, make sure you get names quickly. This is something we've done over the last sort of 10 years or so. So hopefully you've got a bit of a sense now of what the C-cube model is all about. Confidence, credibility, connection. You get them all, if you're able to use all elements, you will be a great trainer and you'll be very influential.
So yes, so you're right, that completes an overview of the C-cubed model. And for more information on that model and also any other aspect of how to design and deliver great business training, do read the book, The Financial Times Guide to Business Training through Pearson's. And finally, we'd be really keen to get any feedback that you have on either that model or any other content that you see in the book. We're happy to answer questions because we teach this model and a whole lot of other stuff on our Train the Trainer programs. Thanks very much for watching.